It seems there's certainly no light at the end of the Eskom tunnel, and that's after an analysis by the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research found that load shedding this year is actually set to hit record highs. What does it mean for you and I? Well, let's bring in Principal Engineer at the CSIR, that's Warrick Pierce, who joins us now via our Twitter link. And Warrick, I imagine you and I don't have too much great news for those who are hoping for some kind of light at the end of the tunnel. But let's speak about where we are so far. 12 days of May, and I think 10 of them have had load shedding in one way or the other. Is this mostly because, and you're predicting, by the way, that there's still a whole lot worse to come. Is this because of unprecedented demand or just ailing infrastructure?
Yeah, so Yande morning, it's as you said, it's got to do more with the current system. The actual demand, we haven't even gotten to pre-COVID levels in terms of demand. So we're still recovering from COVID in terms of how much electricity we're using, but there just really isn't enough supply to meet that demand, and hence the load shedding.
Yeah. Part of what the CSIR has done is actually kind of, I guess, look ahead. And the picture is obviously quite grim, as many might expect. But help us understand how you're doing that in a context where not every, I guess, bout of load shedding that is announced is, in fact, carried out.
Yeah, so currently the levels, so we've measured until the end of April. So as you've mentioned, May has been a bad month for load shedding as well. And what we've noticed is that the levels are not too much more than previous years, but a metric that's used to sort of understand the functionality of the Eskom fleet is known as the energy availability factor. And that's been sort of dwindling on an ever decreasing trend for the last couple of years, and we noticed that it's decreased in 2022 as well. So that would be a predictor that there would be more load shedding as expected. So looking at that trend of energy availability factor of a downward trend, we would estimate probably an increase in terms of load shedding for 2022. From 2020 to 2021, we see a 40% increase in load shedding. So there's no indications that there's a turnaround on that.
Yeah, okay. Let's apply a bit more perspective to that, because I suspect the numbers sometimes sound a bit more confusing. The last time I checked, there had been just over 1,000 gigawatt-hours of power cuts in April alone. This, I understand, suggests to us that we are well on track to already beating last year's hours of load shedding. Is that right?
No, that's not correct. We're as I said earlier, we're fairly similar, besides May, which has been bad, to previous years. So there's not sort of a magnitude of order change in terms of load shedding, but we are expecting it to more than likely increase than the previous years. So that trend is, unfortunately, as you mentioned earlier, the light at the end of the tunnel is still quite far away. And what's quite clear is that for things to improve, they first need to stabilize, and we're still sort of on a downward trend. So hopefully soon the country or the system can then sort of just stabilize and then sort of start meeting demand, and then we can sort of get out of this. But that's probably going to be quite a lengthy process.
Right. Speak to us about how load shedding potentially causes more outages. I mean, we've seen anecdotally, for instance, in the city of Johannesburg, city power officials being able to explain and concede that because they're having to turn off their grid so often and switch it on and back again, that ironically is leading to more breakdowns because the system's not built for that.
No, that's correct, and that's the problem. A lot of municipalities and distributors as well, Eskom distribution as well, is having that problem. The system wasn't designed to not be used. I mean, load shedding you mentioned earlier about it shouldn't become the norm. It really shouldn't become the norm. Load shedding is something that's quite extreme. It's to use there to protect the stability of the grid and saying, well, we don't have enough supply, we can't meet the demand, so then we need to turn off some demand. But as the systems weren't designed for that. So that turning on and off, and it's also causing costs to customers. In terms of the actual appliances that are being damaged. So load shedding really is not a good thing, but it's sort of extreme intervention to make sure that the whole system doesn't go down.
Yeah. And what impact is this having on Eskom's fleet performance because of just how frequent the power cuts are?
Well, it's sort of the Eskom fleet performance is causing the load shedding. So the load shedding is sort of just a byproduct or an output of that. So currently the Eskom fleet is getting to points where, we're sort of not too far off from 50% availability. So that's out of 2 power stations, only 1 is available, which is really concerning. The numbers, used to be above 90%. So there is this significant downward trend. It seems to be slowing down. But as long as the short sort of answer is we don't have enough supply at the moment to meet demand, and this is even when demand is sort of plateauing for the last more than 10 years.
Yeah, in fact, I thought you were going to continue there, but the acting MD for generation at Eskom in yesterday's briefing saying that none of the stations that are currently working are actually operating at full capacity, and I guess that already gives you some kind of perspective. There were also concerns around the kind of coal or the type of coal that Eskom uses. Your analysis, how much attention did it give to that?
Well, I mean, just to further to your other points, if the Eskom fleet was running at sort of normal operational levels, call it 70, 80% energy availability factor, we wouldn't have load shedding. We wouldn't need to burn the excess amount of diesel that we're burning at the moment, which is costing the country billions of rand. Obviously, Eskom's in a tight spot. They've got 2 options: more load shedding or burn diesel, and they're pretty much doing as much diesel as they can to avoid load shedding, but it's really increasing the cost of electricity. So that's not ideal. But in terms of the coal in South Africa, we haven't done a specific analysis on the coal of South Africa. But in general, the coal, Eskom has done an amazing job of burning poor quality coal for a very long time.
With that in mind, what does Eskom's involvement in the so-called just transition even look like? Because already there's a lot of conversation, for instance, in industry among mining companies to move away from coal because of the adverse effects it has on the environment. I imagine that's not even a conversation that Eskom can begin in a context where not even the right coal, so to speak, is being used.
Yeah, it's a difficult conversation. It's something that the CSIR are speaking to quite a lot of international funders and institutions around this just energy transition. Myself as a sort of energy systems modeler or planner, I think that it's a difficult conversation for us to have in South Africa because we're in an electricity crisis. We can't keep the lights on. So to be asking us to decommission coal power stations at this moment I just don't think it's a viable option for South Africa.
Yeah, we've been mired in this crisis for so long. I wonder if it's worth asking whether or not there are still ways out, so to speak. Sometimes you go so deep down a spiral that it almost feels whatever's done now, because of just how deeply entrenched the problem is unlikely to lead to any kind of meaningful outcome.
This is South Africa. We always fix things. It'll turn around. It's just going to take time. But I think it's an important point you're raising there, and I think it needs to be clear to South Africans in general that the problem hasn't started improving yet. So that turnaround is still going to take some time. So I fully agree that load shedding shouldn't be seen as the norm, and we shouldn't accept it as the norm. But realistically, it's going to be around for a few years.
All right, it's on that sobering note we'll leave it. Warrick Pierce, thanks for speaking to us. Really appreciate your time on the AM Report. Warrick is with the CSIR. He is a principal engineer.